Subway is one of the most popular sandwich companies on the planet. With almost 45,000 locations in more than 100 countries, you can find a Subway almost anywhere. But who created this wildly successful conglomerate? You may be surprised to learn that it was a poor boy who was simply trying to save money for medical school. Long before the world fell in love with Subway sandwiches, Fred DeLuca was born in Brooklyn, New York, on October 3, 1947. The DeLuca family wasn't wealthy, and they moved from place to place so that Fred's father could continue to work and provide for his family. Although they moved from Brooklyn to the Bronx and then to Schenectady, they finally settled in Connecticut just when Fred was finishing high school. During this time, Fred was seriously considering becoming a doctor and had even been accepted into a pre-med program. However, as Fred knew his parents could not afford to pay for his education, it felt like a pipe dream. Considering he was working for only $1.25 an hour at a local hardware store, it seemed improbable that the young New Yorker would ever be able to save up enough for quality education. But everything changed at a backyard barbecue when Fred was only 17 years old. Family friends from upstate New York, the Bucks, had recently moved nearby and hosted a party at their home. At the barbecue, Fred started talking to Peter Buck about his conundrum, and the two came up with quite the idea. Peter would loan young Fred $1,000 so they could start a small business and make the money he needed for college. According to the stories, it was actually Pete's idea that Fred open a sub shop. But Fred didn't know anything about subs or opening a small business. While Pete made it seem incredibly easy, he was not a businessman, but a nuclear physicist. And Fred wasn't so sure that it would be as simple as renting a store and selling food, as Pete had said. But even though Pete didn't have experience, he did have confidence in the idea and the money to support it. And with this one idea, the company that would soon be the biggest fast food chain in the world was born. Although there certainly weren't many sub shops around, the idea didn't exactly come out of thin air. Pete had recently read an article about a man in upstate New York who opened a sub shop and had successfully opened 37 more within 10 years. Pete and Fred figured if it could be done, they could do it, and set the same goal for themselves. They stayed up through the night thinking of menu items and prices, and the next day, Fred found himself a storefront. It was 1965, and there was a store available where his family lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It certainly wasn't perfect and was a bit off the beaten path, but they were able to come to an agreement with the landlord in just a few minutes, and without a contract, it was theirs. The only thing left to do was learn about making and selling subs. The two new entrepreneurs took a road trip and first headed up to Pete's hometown of Portland, Maine. And of the various shops they visited, they came to the conclusion that they most enjoyed the flavors at Amato's and the many options at Jersey Mike's. So they took the best of both and got to work. The idea was essentially that they would make it up as they went, and anything that customers didn't like or didn't benefit the business would be changed as needed. Pete's Submarines, as it was originally called, was in business on August 28, 1965. And to say the first day was a success would be an understatement. They sold 300 subs in just one day and ran out of ingredients. As this was before the time of digital marketing, and as they didn't have any money to spare on advertising, in the days leading up to the opening, Fred simply gave out flyers to people in their cars near the store. And though it wasn't a genius marketing plan, it actually worked. However, there was one big problem. The customers that came that first day never came back because the subs simply weren't very good. As it turned out, making subs wasn't quite as easy as Fred and Pete had assumed it would be, and for weeks after the opening, the store was more or less empty. They tried to market better, even paying for an expensive radio ad, but within 6 months of opening day, Pete wanted to close. He told Fred, "Let's just lock the door and throw away the key." The truth is that they couldn't afford to pay rent on the store, and while Fred didn't want to give up the shop, it seemed inevitable. But instead of succumbing to failure, they decided to try something many would consider crazy. They opened another shop. The idea was that they would be able to test out different types of subs and prices at the two shops, but also that with two locations, people would think the subs were in higher demand. The second shop was expensive to open, but within just a few months, it was already turning a profit. And by July of 1966, the two were opening their third location. But when winter of that year arrived, all three businesses started to fail. Pete and Fred realized that people didn't go out to eat as much in the winter or around the holidays, so they patiently waited for spring to come again. Luckily, that first winter wasn't repeated again, although they always noticed a lull. Because of their impressive reputation, people continued to visit the sub shop all year round. While Fred was still attending his college classes, his focus was to both graduate and complete his and Pete's goal of opening 37 restaurants in just 10 years. From 1965 to 1973, the two men opened 16 sub shops around the New England area. During this time, they realized several aspects of their original plan that weren't quite working to their advantage. The first was the name. During radio advertisements and even through word of mouth, many people thought Pete's Submarines sounded like Pizza Marines. So they decided to change it to Pete's Subway. By 1968, it was simply called Subway. Although they were doing well, 16 was still far away from 37, and Fred realized that within only 2 years left in his 10-year plan, he was going to need some help to get it done. That's when he reached out to William Rosenberg, the man who had started and successfully franchised Dunkin' Donuts. William had two suggestions for young Fred: that he open stores where people would park their cars, and that he started franchising. Fred and Pete didn't reach their goal within the first 10 years, but once they started franchising, everything changed. In fact, only 20 years after opening their doors, there were more than 5,000 Subway locations. With this incredible success and seemingly unlimited opportunity for growth, Fred decided that instead of becoming a doctor or a psychologist, he would dedicate his career to running the Subway enterprise. Today, Subway has more stores than McDonald's, KFC, or any other fast food chain on earth. And while their subs are beloved by millions, one of the most important aspects of the business that propelled Subway into the #1 spot was its marketing tactics. By the early 2000s, Subway was certainly successful, but there was one event that tripled the company's sales. Fred had read about a man from Indiana, Jared Fogle, who had lost 245 pounds by eating only Subway sandwiches for a year. And of course, Fred wanted to meet Jared. He then decided to make Jared the official spokesperson for the company and created an entire advertising campaign based on Jared. The idea was that even though Subway was fast food, it was actually good for you. Healthy, low-fat options were available and highly promoted. People around the United States and the world were hooked on Subway. But they didn't stop there. The next idea came from one of their franchise owners. He said they should make their foot-long sandwiches for only $5. Sales at the test location jumped from $14,000 to $23,000 per week. And another campaign hit televisions around the world promoting the new offer. In the end, the $5 footlong brought in more than $1 billion in revenue. Although financially Subway was doing extremely well at the turn of the century, there were several public and behind-the-scenes problems they had to deal with. Jared Fogle, who was Subway's ambassador, was found engaging in underage illicit sexual encounters in both the United States and Thailand. And although DeLuca and the rest of the Subway executives claimed they had no prior knowledge of his pedophilia, it caused problems with the public and their loyalty to the company. As well, many of the company's franchise owners only had a few stores, which weakened them financially and put a strain on the business as a whole. One of the other problems they encountered was that other fast food chains, such as McDonald's, were offering more variety on their menus, whereas Subway's options were essentially the same as they had always been. And if you didn't want a sub, there was simply nothing else to get. So in 2015, Subway experienced a huge financial downslide and actually closed over 3,000 stores in just 5 years. Sadly, when Subway was first responding to this decline in revenue, Fred DeLuca passed away. And while his legacy will absolutely live on as an incredibly ambitious entrepreneur, where Subway is going seems to be a bit up in the air. Over the past few years, Subway has continued to close hundreds of locations per year. However, as they still have over 45,000 stores, that doesn't mean that they aren't still one of the most successful fast food businesses in the world. Many believe that the business model is sound, but there are simply too many stores for the demand for sandwiches. And in 2023, there are rumors that the company is being sold with the help of JP Morgan for upwards of $10 billion. We can't say for sure where Subway is headed, but one thing is for sure. Fred and Pete created something seriously special with that $1,000. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the harness maker who invented Hermes.